Well, this morning we've got a pretty nice morning around town, around the state. It's going to get a little bit rainier as the day goes on. You can probably tell that just looking at this map. Unfortunately, this morning's Weather Channel map has no isobars, but we'll remedy that when we go to look at 850 millibars after a few minutes in the discussion. But you can see the weather of interest is one storm off the Canadian Maritimes that's pretty intense, actually, and we're seeing just a little bit of its precipitation shield because much of the storm is well offshore now, as it turns out. But this is snowing in New Brunswick and parts of the state of Maine and New Hampshire, Vermont, as well as New York State. So that's kind of a late season snow, not a very heavy one in all locations, but in some. And that's an intense storm. We'll see some characteristics of that when we move to other analyses. Then in the Central Plains, there is some active sort of weather that's brewing across the southern Mississippi Valley, central and southern Mississippi Valley is probably more accurate. And then along the northern Mississippi Valley, precipitation spreading from Wisconsin, Minnesota into Wisconsin, and that'll kind of encroach during the day today. So we're going to have conditions deteriorate as the day goes on, unfortunately, although it won't get very cold, at least not initially, so that's good. So we're not going to get a return to the chill that we had earlier this week. But this is the 7 o'clock this morning weather map, and that's kind of the main features of interest. And let's now look at the temperatures across the country at the same time, roughly the same time. It's closer to 8 a.m. for the temperature map. And you can see chilly in parts of southern New England, 33 degrees at Caribou, Maine, explaining why it's probably snowing in many of those locations in the St. Lawrence River Valley and parts of New Brunswick, Canada. Very warm down along the Texas Gulf Coast and the Florida Gulf Coast, 77 at Miami, 73 down at Corpus Christi. And we're 46 here in Madison, not too bad. The last few mornings we've had temperatures in the low 30s when we wake up, actually all the way through the end of the weekend. And so it's really nice to be in the mid 40s by the time you wake up today. It's not too bad, and it'll be maybe 55 by the end of the day and then cooling later on. But generally, it's sort of seasonable temperatures across the central plains of the United States today. In the northern plains, over Montana, parts of North Dakota, temperatures are pretty low, low 20s actually in Great Falls. So pretty chilly. And that's because there's an anticyclone, a region of high pressure building in from Canada, as has been the case for much of this extended cool period. We've had one after another of these anticyclones. Maybe you've noticed the almost complete absence of rain. It's been one high after another, and the cyclones have been passing to our south. And then a pretty nice day along the west coast temperature-wise as well. And with the cool temperatures, as we've noted a number of times so far this term, it tends to be relatively dry, and the dew points reflect that. You know, it was 33 degrees at Caribou, Maine, but 23 dew points, so that's why it can snow at temperatures just a little bit above freezing, because it's so dry. The snowflakes are sublimating and cooling the air right near them and staying cold enough to snow. 22-degree dew point at Boston, chilly. Notice the high dew points along the Texas Gulf Coast, notably 65 at Miami, 67 at Houston, 71 at Corpus Christi. After that, though, you don't have to go that far north to find dew points in the high 30s or low 40s across much of the southern states, which means it's a relatively dry day for them. And we have a dew point of 28 here in Madison with a temperature of 46, so a pretty low relative humidity for us as well. And then that's true across the entire Intermountain West, where dew points are quite low, sometimes because of elevation, sometimes just because the air is cold, as we noted before. I wanted to show you that weather that's beginning to take shape in the Central Plains actually has the chance of becoming more significant. This is the categorical severe weather threat for today, and so there's an enhanced risk over Louisiana and eastern Texas and over south central Oklahoma, then a marginal risk across everywhere that's shaded in green. So those are places where during the day today, the weather could get a little bit more interesting and potentially dangerous. Tornado threat is about 5% at the core of that categorical enhanced precipitation, severe weather threat. So it's not really a big tornadic threat, but there is a threat for pretty damaging winds, 50 knots or higher, across much of Louisiana and parts of south central Oklahoma. And the hail threat is also a little more substantial than the threat for tornadoes. So it looks like the severe weather that may develop over the southern plains today will be characterized more by strong winds, maybe by some hail and heavy rains, not so much by tornadic activity. And that's good news for a large number of our fellow citizens, of course. So let's take a look at the satellite picture over the continental United States and adjacent waters. So here's the storm I mentioned that's just now over the Maritimes between Newfoundland, Prince Edward Island, and Nova Scotia. we'll see that reflected on a couple of analyses I'll show later. Notice the strong convective activity that's blowing up along its cold front. This is the cold front of the cyclone, and this is probably the occluded front, and then there's a little bit of a warm front in there. And so you can see that structure and its consequences for precipitation production occurring quite nicely off the coast here. And then here's the region of potential severe weather. It doesn't look like much right now, as is obviously the case, but you can notice that the flow of air is from the far southeastern Pacific Ocean basin. So this is warm and moist air from the west coast of Mexico that's getting entrained into this developing system here in the southern states. And there's a little bit of a swirly up over Minnesota and coming into our own state that you might be able to see there. And that's going to give us the chance for precipitation later today and into the night, but not severe weather like there is a chance down over the south central plains. So this is a really nice satellite picture from that perspective to test the forecast. Do we really know how these severe conditions develop? But the answer is yes. Will they become widespread? It's always a bit of a question. You don't know for sure. However, there's nothing really to get nervous about right now. And to make a forecast for the rest of the day that suggests really bad weather is a miracle of the 20th and 21st century. There was no way to do that even 70 to 100 years ago. But now we do this with routine accuracy. Okay, so that's pretty nice. Okay, then let's take a look at, what did I have next? I have the radar next, just to give you an idea of what the complexion of the weather actually is down over the south central plains. Widely scattered, relatively weak, thundery type showers down here over Tennessee, parts of Arkansas, parts of Louisiana. So the exciting stuff is yet to come, and so we'll want to keep our eye on that. If you're interested, you'll be able to download these radar images from my department's website, www.aos.wisc.edu. They're always available. Here's the precipitation reflectivity that's coming across the Mississippi River from Minnesota to Wisconsin, and that's going to make its way towards us today. Don't forget, we have an 18-degree dew point depression right now, or something like that. I think it's 18 degrees. So it's going to take a while for falling precipitation particles to moisten the column sufficiently that some of their brethren will make it all the way down to the ground. So for a period of time, it'll be cloudy, a featureless sky later today, but it won't be raining. And then eventually the rain will start to make its way down, is what it looks like right now. Okay. So that's the overview. But here's another way to look at this whole thing. I'm going to show you this PowerPoint that I made this morning for you. This is the analysis at 850 millibars last night at 7 p.m. And at that time, this is where the storm currently over the Maritimes was. It was kind of sitting right over the St. Lawrence River Valley. This is at 850 millibars. That's described up here to the left. And so these black lines are the equivalent of isobars at about a mile above sea level. So this is a really intense cyclone. We would have seen this nicely illustrated had the Weather Channel maps had isobars on them. So we've got a really beautiful storm. The red lines are isotherms, lines of constant temperature. So one can get an idea that there's a cold front well out over the Atlantic Ocean, cutting across the northern part of the peninsula of Florida. I'll draw that in for you in a minute. A warm front extending out eastward into the Atlantic, and then a nicely wrapped up occluded front right in this location over the Maritimes in northern Maine. And then here's another cyclone over the Canadian archipelago, and a really strong, notice the horizontal distance between the red lines, the isotherms, is very small across Saskatchewan, parts of Alberta, and then parts of, Manitoba and Saskatchewan, and then Montana. This is a really strong cold front as well. So if I place those lines on there for you, this is the analysis from last night. Here's the cold front with our eastern cyclone, the warm front, and the nicely wrapped up occluded front. There's the center of the minimum sea level pressure. And then here's a cold front stretching southward from this cyclone over the archipelago. And so notice every time you have a cold front, there's a strong horizontal temperature gradient to its west. Okay? And if I put these features on top of the 500 millibar map from this morning, you get, again, our relationship that we keep on talking about, where we've got a cyclone sitting at the surface just about underneath the upper level cyclone in this case, because this thing is occluded. And when storms get occluded, that's one of the characteristic signals that they have, is that the upper level low sits on top of the lower level low. Here over the archipelago, there's not much of a warm frontal structure that I could determine from the lower troposphere. Here's the cyclone, and it's also sitting pretty much underneath its upper level counterpart at 500 millibars. Remember, the temperature contrasts associated especially with the cold front are manifest through a deep column of the troposphere. And so, if we look at the 300 millibar winds, which show us the sort of winds at the top of the troposphere, we notice a really intense jet stream going from North Carolina all the way up to Newfoundland in Canada. And 138 knots is the maximum wind just off the coast of Nova Scotia. And if I then put the analysis on top of that, you see in a little bit of a jet here over northern Manitoba, and you can see there's a correlation between the position of the cold front and its temperature contrast in the local wind speed max. It's more dramatic with this better developed storm off the east coast. Look at how the cold front is perfectly aligned with the maximum upper level wind speed in the upper troposphere. And that has to be true by the thermal wind, where there's a strong horizontal temperature contrast, there's strong geostrophic vertical shear, and so the winds keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger in magnitude as you go higher and higher in the troposphere. And this is a beautiful example of that, ripped right off last night's weather maps. So it's a pretty good example of the kind of thing we've been talking about in class. Okay? Okay, then let us look at the West Coast satellite image. It's a little bit boring today compared to what we've seen in prior times during the term. There's not really any very well organized weather in the eastern part of the Pacific Basin. There's a really strong push from the tropics well to the west of Hawaii. This is past the dateline. A push from the tropics going straight poleward toward the Aleutian chain. Part of this may be outflow and organization of the flow from the super typhoon Surugai from early this week. This is a cyclone that's spinning around near or just to the east of the or west of the dateline. That's pretty intense as well, but we don't have time to look at that one in any detail. So the eastern part of the Pacific Basin, relatively boring today. And since it's Friday, and it'll be the last time we do this term because we will have our review session for the final next Friday, not a lecture. So I want to just show you the forecast for the coming week as discerned by looking at the 850 millibar temperatures at 12-hour intervals. So this is a forecast made last night. This one's valid at 7 a.m. this morning. So this gives us an idea of what the conditions were this morning around the region, both the continental United States, the 48 states, and central Canada. So Madison's right where the X is, of course, in southern Wisconsin. And we start out relatively chilly to the north, just as I showed you on the more close-up 850 millibar map, a very strong cold front coming through central Canada. Now, by this time, this is a few hours past the time that I showed you, it's made its way into western Ontario. Here's the strong cold front associated with the storm that was off the east coast. Then a warm front and an included front wraps into the middle of that. So this looks a lot like the initial map that I showed you before. So we're going to keep track of, this is what makes me nervous looking at this first map. It's really cold just to our north and west. Where will that cold air go? So let's march forward at 12-hour intervals. This is tonight. It looks like that cold air sags a little bit southward into the northwest corner of Minnesota, but not the desperately cold air. Makes more progress southward through the night. I think that's when our rain comes in later, late this afternoon, maybe early evening, as this cold front makes its way through. But it's not the heart of the cold air, luckily. But it does make its way through by the time we get through the middle of the day, Saturday. So the rain will be most of a Saturday morning and Saturday afternoon. And then it just gets cold. It just gets a little bit colder than it's been for most of the day Saturday into Sunday morning. But then that's not bad news in the long run. Look at this really warm air that starts to develop over eastern New Mexico, West Texas, western part of Kansas and Oklahoma. And the winds are coming from the southwest towards the upper western Great Lakes states. So it looks like warm air advection will begin to prevail as we move into, this is now Monday morning. Look at how much warmer it's getting in Madison. We were in the blues, now we're in the greens, which is about plus 8 degrees C at 8:50, and continued warm advection during the day Monday. This is now Monday night. It really starts to be strong warm advection. Very warm day here on Tuesday. I don't see how we won't be in the 70s on Tuesday of next week. So it's going to be a really nice Tuesday in terms of temperature. But then you can see on the back side of that warm tongue of, orangey colors here, where it's really warm air, is another cold front with a cyclone to the north. And that kind of comes plowing through during the morning on Wednesday, late Tuesday night, Wednesday morning. It doesn't get bitterly cold. Remember, the cold pool of air was started up here in northern Canada, and it's stayed there this whole time. And so we don't get bitterly cold, but we do have a pretty strong cyclone development that occurs Wednesday night into Thursday. This is Wednesday night. Look at this wimpy little cyclone that's starting to get itself put together over southwest Missouri. 12 hours later, it looks like this. Much more intense, probably moderate to heavy rain over us on Thursday morning. Not bitterly cold, but probably 48, 50 degrees if we're lucky, and raining pretty heavily. So a pretty cold a pretty rainy day on Thursday. And then by the time we get to Thursday afternoon, it chills down a little bit. Perhaps we'll see a mixed flurry in there on the Thursday afternoon. I don't know if it's out of the question. It's probably unlikely. And then by Friday morning, back to what we're more used to this month, unfortunately, a little bit of chilly, a little colder than normal temperatures. And still the threat of this cold pool sitting to our north and west, just about where it started today. It hasn't really moved much. So I still don't know if we're under the gun for this thing coming in. We'll have to hope that we're not during finals week, but that could be a potential situation that we experience. So that's what it looks like for our forecast. A really nice middle of the week, then a rainy Thursday and Friday, and then a chillier subsequent weekend, with a chilly weekend to begin here.